good? All right. It's weird. I'm used to hearing myself on one of these things. So I'm Andrew.
And I'm Anton Stringer.
We're going to jump in, just tell you a little bit about who we are, because for those of you who aren't familiar, we sort of, the whole theme on this, the new at the helm that we're starting with, Anton and I both joined the leadership roles for Civ after the launch of the base game.
Yeah.
So, Anton, why don't you talk about yourself?
Sure. So I've been with Frederiksen for a long time. I was the lead designer on Civilization 6 Rise and Fall. But before then, I have a long history with the Civilization franchise. I grew up playing, Civilization 3, 4, 5. Got a job as an intern back in 2011, working on the Civ 5 expansions and DLC. And I've been working on Civ ever since. So I worked on both expansion packs for Civilization 5, Beyond Earth, a little bit on Beyond Earth Rising Tide as well, and Civilization 6 base game before coming into the role for lead designer on Civilization 6 Rise and Fall. So I've seen a lot of different iterations of the franchise, both as a fan and now as a developer. So it's a really fun place to be, and I'm excited for people to play kind of my spin on the Civ formula.
Yeah. So I'm Andrew, and I actually have been a senior producer for Access for a while now. I joined and I took over Beyond Earth. Again, sort of that theme of the expansion. I took over Beyond Earth for Rising Tide. I'm not trying to get the word rise into every title, but it seems to be working so far. Before I worked in video games, I was actually a high school English teacher, and I also produced a school yearbook, and that's sort of where I fell in love with the idea of production, but I wasn't quite as passionate about yearbooks, so I love video games. That's basically, I began my career as a QA tester with the goal to get into game production. And I worked at a few different companies, eventually joining Frederiksen about 3 years ago. And I was excited to move over and help with the Civ core team and basically take Rise and Fall, from the launch into this new version.
And you got the keys from Dennis from the Civilization 6 base game like pretty early on, right?
Right, yeah. On launch day, when Civ 6 went out the door, we had a big party, and the former senior producer handed me the literal keys. So we have all the keys for Steam we give to each other to test the game. So I got the keys to Civ.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we wanted to talk about, sort of like, what do you get for new at the helm? What does that mean? Why is that a good idea? Not just new people there. And one of the big things is that it's these fresh perspectives that we can bring, new ideas. Like Anton mentioned, he's worked on Civ for quite a while and played it even longer. But he wasn't there driving all of those. It's new ideas that can come to the table.
Yeah, so having the fresh perspectives, I mean, obviously with a game like Civilization that's about all of human history, there's plenty of things to explore. There's lots of really exciting ideas. And, Civilization as a history kind of has as a game, has a history of having lots of different people in the leadership roles. Like, Sid Meier was at the helm of the first Civilization game, but since then it's sort of, he's shared the leadership with different members of our team. And every iteration of Civilization in the main game has been having a different lead designer to kind of give a different, unique spin on the formula and to explore things that we haven't done before.
All right. So, but the nice thing is that we've still got Sid at the studio, who's guiding this. He's still, it still is very much Sid Meier's Civilization in that, we take the principles that he has, and one of the big principles that Sid has sort of given to us is this rule of thirds. Yeah. This idea that with every new product, everything should be working with a third, taking the established gameplay, taking the ideas that, that's part of the heart of the franchise, that's part of what makes Civ Civ. You got to keep those things. We bring a third of the game forward, and we take another third and we update that. We change it, make it new, fresh.
We use some of the lessons that we've learned from the last iteration from fan feedback like you guys provide for us, and we say like, oh, okay, well, we should really update this to make it more fun in a different way.
And then, obviously we want to make sure there's lots of new stuff too. So we take another third is that branching out there and trying the new ideas, the things that haven't been done before, or doing things that have been done but in a very different way. We'll talk more about that with some of the details for Rise and Fall.
So, like, this is this rule that Sid had from very early on to guide the design of the game, but it also works sort of for like the leadership and for the production as well. Because we're the sort of like third new for our team, but we still have like Ed Beach, the lead designer.
You're updated. I'm new.
I guess I'm updated. Yeah, I was around before, but yeah. So we have lots of common members of the team, but we also shift people around. Like Brian Basati, our art director on the base game. He was kind of shifted into a different role, and we had a different art director for the expansion, but Brian Bassotti was still very involved. He actually helped, he was very instrumental in making the cinematic for the game, which you see on the slide there. That's the opening shot, at least for the base game one. So yeah, like lots of similar faces, but shifting around into new roles.
So, starting position, obviously we're going to keep up our nautical theme because that's really fun for us. Basically, like you said, we took over at launch, and the first thing we had to do was figure out where we were, right? We don't just come up with ideas out of the blue, and we don't want to, you know, kind of just guess at what we are. So we have to stop, take stock, and you know, one of the nice things for us, we got a really good reception at launch from, you know, critics and the fans. You know, obviously there's things people want a little bit differently, but overall, the reception went over really well. And on top of that, we were sitting there, we knew we had a team that, you know, like Anton said, while we're new to these roles, we still had the support of the members that were there. So we had these veterans that knew how to make not just Civ, but Civ 6 specifically. And they know, you know, they know the franchise, they know what it means.
Yeah.
And the game itself was chock full. I mean, you have a really good way to put it.
Yeah, we had a ton of features, like with Ed Beach at the helm of Civilization 6, and me having worked with him on the both Civ 5 expansions, a lot of the systems that we had included for the Civ 5 expansions, we just included in the base game for Civilization 6. So, religion, trade routes, espionage, almost everything that we had in the expansions for Civ 5. Ed was just like, hey, let's put it into the base game for Civ 6, because you know we appreciated that a lot of the fans have said, you know, Civ games are great, but let's wait for expansions to add more features, and we wanted to add as many new systems that people enjoyed, that we knew people enjoyed right away. So we decided to do that. But it kind of left us in an interesting spot for the expansion for me, because a lot of the sort of clear expansion things to do were not available, which was great. Because we kind of like had to pick a new direction moving forward, and we got to explore some brand new spaces.
Yeah, so you know, that's sort of the ideas that you formed at the beginning. These are the goals. You know, we took stock of what everything had, and we said, okay, well, what do we want to achieve? These are sort of the design directives
these are sort of
Anton came up with at the beginning.
Yeah, these are the big points, and these come from all over. These come from our internal QA department. These come from 2K's QA department. These come from fan feedback. We look at all the forums online, and you know, often there's
a lot.
Way too much probably. But yeah, it's great stuff, and like, you know, people will make polls of like, who do we think is the most overpowered Civ? Who do we think is not powerful enough? We take a look at that, and we kind of weave that into our feedback and our perspective going forward. And so for kind of like after Civilization 6 launched, some of the big takeaways for me, I mean, there's a lot of like smaller balance stuff that we handled as well, but sort of the big overarching things for me were these 3 points. So we noticed that having a big empire was just like very powerful. Like it was kind of hard to stop. Like we had one of the guys who works on XCOM was playing Civ kind of in his free time, and he sort of like pulled me aside one day. He's like, I have an empire with like 35 cities, and I have like 50 trade routes, and I'm just unstoppable. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Like that's like, I thought that you would have been stopped by now. But yeah, he's really good at playing the game. So that's one thing. But yeah, so we looked at these big empires and how they just scaled up massively, and we wanted to provide more challenges to big empires, because it's great to be on top, it's great to be dominating the world, but after a certain point it kind of gets boring. Like you don't have any challenges, you're just kind of hitting next turn waiting for victory. So having more challenges for those big empires is really important.
And the other thing that happens with that is, you know, when you get big and if there aren't challenges, your borders don't change. You know, you get to a point where all the land is claimed and everything's sort of locked, and then you know you can have a big war, but that's pretty much the only thing that changes civ lines, civ borders.
Yeah, so I was thinking, well, it might be nice to change this cultural borders between civs in some way without direct warfare.
So yeah, you just basically get the world to be more dynamic and shift, and then also to draw people into diplomacy more, make diplomacy matter beyond just, you know, am I at work, did I make them happy, or do I get the trade that I needed, the deal?
Yeah, like we were really happy with the agenda system that we added in Civilization 6, where you sort of like have different objectives with different leaders to get them to like you, and that was really great. But we noticed that once they liked you, like the main benefit of that was that they wouldn't attack you, or they'd be less likely to attack you. So we thought, well, what if we add something to diplomacy to give it actual gameplay bonuses where you can both kind of benefit from maintaining a relationship?
So basically this game brought us to the big pitch. This is what we went out and said to 2K, to the rest of Firaxis, here's what we want to do.
Yeah.
And one of the first directives was bringing out the storytelling capabilities of Civ. And that's not to say we want to bring in like narrative story, but more like those water cooler moments. People who play Civ love to talk about this game where I had this war over here and I tricked this guy into being my friend, and you have those conversations, and that's your story of your game. That's your sort of alternate history, and we wanted to embrace and empower that and make that something that the game doesn't just allow but actually recognizes.
Right. Yeah. And having those, like that's kind of something that really interests me about Civilization ever since I played it growing up. And that's honestly one of the favorite things that I see on the internet is when people write up stories of their games, and it's like multiple paragraphs, and like I did this, and then I did this, and then so and so backstabbed me, and then usually ends, and then somebody nuked me or something like that. So, but yeah, it's those really fun story moments I thought would be fun to play up.
And obviously, with a Civ expansion, you have to add systems. That's Civ. So the dynamic empires. It was actually a term we threw around a lot, and it sort of became. It was a system. And it kind of used for, we're not sure how it's going to happen, but that's the border changing that we were talking about. We want your empire to shift, grow, and change.
As opposed to being static and, you kind of are locked into your thing and nothing really challenges you. Make it dynamic.
And I remember trying, people would be like, okay, how are you going to do that? What does that mean? We're like, we'll let you know.
Get back to you.
But it's going to change and it'll be fun.
Yeah.
And then Governors. Governors was a really cool one right from the start because almost immediately people were like, okay, cool, I have another thing that I can look at, and based on who you talk to, they're like, oh, it's like great people, or it's like leaders, or it's kind of like this. And they're somewhere in the middle. I think I like to think of them as being sort of on a triangle. You've got leaders over here, great people over here, and governors over here. It's similar, but not the same. There's like a nice Venn diagram.
Yeah, and just having these powerful characters that you could place in your cities and help specialize your cities, because that was a big Civ 6 thing, was helping to play up the specialization of cities with districts and stuff like that. And now you can do the same with governors.
Right. Yeah. And then the historian was our way to sort of say, we're going to capture those moments. We're going to record that. We're going to have a historian who keeps track of the history, and we're going to
writing it all down. Yeah.
Write it all down and say this is the story of your game, and this is you had this unit, and it was the first version was great, super detailed, where we're going to track all this stuff that was basically telling you your story, not empowering it so much, but and telling it to you, retelling it.
Right.
And then of course with Civ, we have to extend, like we talked about, that updated stuff, that third that we want to enhance and improve.
Yeah.
So we were looking at alliances and bringing that up to speed in a new way, and empowering players to sort of get into diplomacy more. And then of course, lots of new leaders, new units, new wonders, and we actually extended, I think throughout development, kept adding more. Because well, do you guys want, I freed up some resources, do you want to make another district? Do you want to make another thing?
Yeah.
So we kept adding that throughout the whole time.
Yeah, actually, so Rise and Fall ended up with a water entertainment complex, so you can kind of build on the coast, which is really neat. We liked that because it makes the naval gameplay a little more interesting, makes coastal cities a little bit more powerful. But we didn't start out with that design. That was the sort of thing where, we've kind of been going for a while, and Andrew came up to me and our environment team was like, yeah, actually, we could probably do another district or something if you guys want. And I was like, actually, yeah. Now that we've played a bit with the prototype, having a water district would be really cool. Let's add that.
Yeah. So design came together, and one of the really cool ways all this stuff came together, we're talking about was the dynamic empires, and that was your sort of your pitch at the beginning. That was the theme.
The phrase, the theme.
And it wasn't really a single system, but we still didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And we didn't know how all these new mechanics, like how are governors going to be related to dynamic empires, and what does that have to do to historian? Who are going to be our leaders? And one of the big things that helped us with a lot of that was the opening cinematic. And people may not realize it, but that actually, that's actually a real screenshot of one of the pages. We write the real scripts. We like to convince ourselves it's Hollywood style, but I'm sure they would laugh at it.
Yeah, I had a fun sort of learning experience. This is I think the second draft of our cinematic. It is completely different from what we ended up with, but it was a fun exercise because I read this little book about how to write screenplays and stuff like that, and convinced myself that I knew enough to try this, and I found the software for it. But it's a little bit hard to see in here, but what this thing it helped at least clarify for me was we had this expansion. It had these ideas going on about dynamic empires, about changing empires over time, about governors. And what the cinematic forced us to do was think about, okay, well, what is the essence of the expansion? What is the story? What is the feeling? And how do we communicate that in 2.5 minutes or whatever time we had? So writing, especially the voiceover lines that Sean Bean ended up saying, was a very useful exercise for us to be like, okay, well, like what is the core of what we're trying to make this expansion about?
Right. I think one of the other things that was really fun was how actually making the cinematic helped us decide some of the civs a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about the rest of them, but there were definitely, like, if you've seen it, all these sort of vignettes, as we call them, we like to think of them as capturing threshold moments in history. These are times when empires in history were either about to enter a great age, or they were they were about to collapse because of a war, or some really cool shift was happening. And
moments of crisis.
Moments of crisis, and these were civs, and we're like, that not only is that a cool moment, but they would work in our game pretty well.
Yeah.
And it was like a chicken and the egg, cart before the horse kind of thing. It was feeding back and forth. Well, let's keep this moment. We had to cut a few just because we can't put all of the good moments in. But we're like, well, that one probably could be a civ in the game, so let's keep it in there.
Yeah.
And then we make sure there are a few in there, so even when it goes out, you don't know all of the civs right away. But there's definitely people who are watching the cinematic, guessing at I see that. That's Amsterdam, I bet you. And they're like, yeah, they're onto us.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Yeah, because a lot of our civs were in the cinematic, and the cinematic was the first thing that we announced the game with. But there were some red herrings in there too, so it wasn't like a total reveal. But for people, like some people were like, oh, I recognize the crown that the daughter's wearing in this scene. That's what Queen Sunda wears in Korea and her historic Silla Kingdom. So yeah.
And I think the other really cool thing was taking that theme through the story of the father and daughter. The father he had his chance to shine in the base game cinematic. Like, all right, Dad, it's your time to go away. Let the daughter come up and have center stage. So he's falling, she's rising. It's their threshold as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a great sort of behind-the-scenes look at what Anton's brain was doing a while ago.
Yeah, so something that kind of helps me as a designer, like I'm in my head a lot, especially early on in projects. I'm writing down a lot of things on paper, come up with a lot of different ideas, and I find that the whiteboard is a really useful tool for me, so I go up on the whiteboard and I draw stuff. But then I take pictures of everything, just so I can sort of like document, like, okay, this is this like weird idea that I had, and sometimes it goes nowhere, and sometimes, never see it again. Other times it ends up on a PowerPoint, because I ended up being kind of a big deal. So this was like the early pass of like, how does everything fit together? We had these bullet points of governors, dynamic empires, historian, and this is sort of like how I imagine how they flowed together. So on the left, governors help improve cultural identity, which is the system we'll talk about, but basically, are your cities on your side or not? And that's what became loyalty. And that will influence whether you're getting a dark age or not. On the other side, you have the historian kind of recognizing these different moments, which we called pride moments at the time. They end up becoming historic moments later. And those would give you score towards golden ages. And between dark ages and golden ages, those would give the feeling of dynamic empires that we were trying to go for. And this changed a lot over time, but that's sort of the initial.
This is where an nautical theme actually continues to really work for me, because on the high seas, it was crazy. We started putting the stuff in, and we're going to talk about leaders first. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Choosing the cast. The theme of the dynamic empires, like I talked about already, for the cinematic was really important for us in making sure that we picked leaders who weren't just great candidates because they represented all the other things that we care about, but also making sure that they captured their dynamic empire, the theme of this.
That feeling.
And I think one of my personal favorites was choosing Wilhelmina, and she was a great example of someone who was, they were down but not out. She was ruling in exile, which is a really big challenge, and something that a lot of times wouldn't necessarily make someone the best candidate for a civ leader selection, but in the case of this expansion, it was nail on the head.
Yeah, and she's a beloved figure by the Dutch people even today, so that was a really good choice. One of my favorites was Queen Tamar of Georgia. They're sort of represented in the opening cinematic as like this fortress that's under attack by the Mongols, as she oversaw this great golden age in Georgia's history. You know, I think it expanded it to its largest reach, had flourishing arts and culture, and then 20 years after her reign ended and she died, Genghis Khan and the Mongols came along and just totally trashed the kingdom. So it was like this really funny like rise and fall thing. But she was a really intriguing historical character too. So yeah, like
of course we had like, you know, so like the bullet says there, we were meeting expectations but also trying to surprise fans.
So we got the fan favorites like Genghis Khan and Shaka Zulu.
And you know, so whenever we're putting this together, I think one of the really cool things that we do is we don't ever just choose one leader at a time. We choose a cast. We think of this as we're building. That's why one of our character artists puts these together at the end, and we look at it. We're like, yeah, that is the cast of Rise and Fall. These are the stars that together meet, embody this theme, but also the ideas that we try to bring in every time we're choosing civs. We want to represent, throughout the world, all the different civilizations, different areas, different demographics, different times. I think that one of the things that's easy to fall into is like choosing, we start researching an area like ancient world, and we're like, oh, we find all these great leaders, but wait, they were all 2,000 years ago.
They're all ancient era.
We need to get some more modern people, or we start researching modern, and so it's amazing how many good selections there are, and even those people who on the team, we have obviously some huge history buffs. They know a lot about an area, but everyone seems to know different stuff about different places. And they come together, and we're just like we're learning while we're making these selections and building the cast. And I think we had some really fun surprises, and obviously some classics like Genghis and stuff that we get to bring back. And then that leaves us with this giant cast of characters.
This is everybody that's released right now.
Everybody so far, including all of our DLC and everything. So just a fun one to bring in there. So
yeah, like
first prototype. You want to tell everyone how that?
Sure. Yeah, so early on, we had a pretty small team, and I was prototyping just some of the initial ideas. Was definitely looking at Golden Ages and Dark Ages. I was running these AI autoplays. After I'd leave for work for the day, I'd run a script, and basically the game would play itself, and I'd come in the morning and be like, okay, what happened? Who had a Dark Age? Who had a Golden Age? Whatever, and I was trying different scoring mechanics and all this stuff.
It sounded great. Everything, the map worked out the way you wanted it to.
The map was cool, yeah, so I had this sort of like, kind of, in hindsight, it's kind of boring, but like at the time I was very excited about it. It was like this like bell curve, right? So like everybody in the game was playing with all the players and all the civs, and I'd say like, okay, once each era changes, we look at the top 25% score and the bottom 25% score, and the top ones get a Golden Age, and the bottom ones get a Dark Age, and that's that. If you had 2 Dark Ages in a row, I think it was half of your cities would get destroyed and turn into barbarian camps. Which I was like, that's kind of a crazy idea, but I wanted to try it.
And people were excited. They're like, yeah, losing cities. That take those away. Those people are doing poorly. We should,
Yeah, because that very directly attacked at the goal I had of like, okay, well, let's have borders change over time. Well, if you just take off cities, people are going to come to fill it, or barbarians are going to be there. So that was a very sort of direct hammer approach to like what the design goal I had was.
And then you got this idea that based on the historic moments that you earned, it would choose the 3 best ones based on what the designer thought was the best, and it would basically pick one of these 3 and you can commemorate it and you'll get a bonus.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that seems kind of cool, and we went ahead and put all this stuff in. It wasn't fun.
Didn't work out too well.
It turns out that people don't like having half of their cities taken away. And based on the looks that some of you guys had, you probably could have told us that earlier.
As soon as the AI, it wasn't just the AI playing it, but like actual people in our QA department, and like I actually started playing it with more. I was like, actually, this kind of sucks.
Yeah, the AI logs don't complain when they lose cities.
Right.
The math looked great, so.
Yeah.
But it also went counter to the idea of this history.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a historian that's telling you what's going on, and you care about the history of your game, and we're just knocking cities off the map for 25% of the players, like, wait, where'd all that history go? It's not there anymore. And obviously, history comes with the cities as much as with the map and the players in the game.
So we wanted to preserve that instead of just wiping it out.
And the historic moments were very disconnected from gameplay. You know, you could have a really good era, and you could earn 20 historic moments, but you only ever saw the top 3.
And you might still have a dark age. Yeah,
and
like
you might still have a dark age. But if your top 3 were all religious, well, then you could choose a religious bonus, the religious bonus, or the religious bonus.
Because the top 3 was just like what's worth the most score, and it could be a tie.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I didn't actually want a religious bonus, so that didn't work out the way we wanted.
Yeah. And probably the most important one is that last point there for me, which was that players felt like they didn't have control over what age they were getting. Because we were looking at the game as a whole and saying this top 25%, bottom 25% thing, it's like, even if I'm doing awesome, even if I have overcome a lot of things and built a lot of wonders, if someone else had more score than me, I don't get rewarded. Like I'm like, it's relative to how I do compared to the other players, which felt weird because there's not much I could do other than try to like knock them down, or it's very unclear how to make stuff good happen for me.
Yeah, you didn't just have to play well, you had to play better than other people.
Right.
And otherwise you'd lose cities. Or have other stuff taken from you. So we made some course corrections.
Yeah.
And some of the changes that went in was the first one was we don't take your cities away anymore.
Yeah.
And well, that wasn't fun, so let's stop doing it.
Yeah.
And we came up with this idea of it's called loyalty now, but back then it was called cultural identity.
Right.
And it was this, cities can sort of have a belonging, an identity that they feel, we may be owned by this civ, but we kind of, we used to be owned by this civ, so we identify with them as well.
And now it'd have that, like, it would preserve the history of that city, even through the shifting of empires and all that sort of stuff.
And we started to we were like, well, historic moments need to mean something more than just a bonus that you might get. We want all of them to mean something. So they started, we gave them this era score. So that meant that, every time you got one, even if it wasn't the type of one you wanted, it still was helping you out. It still was giving you something.
Right. Yeah, so the era score there, like back in the scorecard in the previous version, it was just looking at things like, are your cities, how many amenities do they have, how many cities do you have? It was this very sort of like abstract game score type thing. But now we invented this idea of era score, and the main way you got that was from these cool historic moments. And we also made so that when you're competing for ages, trying to get a golden age or a dark age, you're just competing against yourself. It's like, am I doing better than I was before? Am I doing worse than I was before? Here's the threshold that I have to meet in order to get a golden age, and that's independent from what other people are doing. So, you getting a golden age doesn't mean that I can't get a golden age too. Maybe we're just both doing awesome, and that's okay.
I think we're doing all right.
I think we're doing okay. Yeah. And then the last thing was that. When you enter a new era, to make a dedication for like what you want your civilization to focus on in the next era. And this took the place of that top 3 thing, because it used to be tied to moments, and maybe you had all religious moments, but you didn't want a religious thing. So we opened up the choice a little bit, just like, hey, just pick something from this list, and you can kind of have a little bit more freedom there.
And it really shifted the flavor from a commemoration in the previous model was looking back at what you had done, and choosing you chose a bonus, and it was not wildly different from what dedications give you, but they were smaller, they were more confined, and they were of the type that matched what you got.
It also meant that you were incentivized to basically, if you're playing a religious game, your top 3 was going to be religious things, and you just keep doing religion.
It pigeonholed you a little bit.
It pigeonholed you a little bit. So by making it dedications, you're like, okay, well now I want to do military. Like you're able to shift.
It shifted it to something where you're looking forward.
Yes.
Where you're saying this is what we're going to be about. We're dedicated. We're going ahead.
Yeah.
And we started fleshing out the systems as well. And one of the big things that we were talking about here at this point was the governors. People were really behind it, but they weren't quite sure. We had a couple different iterations. The first one that we had was a random set of governors every time you played the game.
Yeah.
I think we were going to do like 20 or 30 governors, and each one
you'd have like 5. You could choose one each time, but then it'd be like a random set every time.
And it turns out that they were also going to be flat. They were going to have one bonus. It was just, this is what this governor is good at. So if you rolled 5 governors that were good at religion and economy, but you were trying to play science, then none of those governors were really terribly helpful for you.
Right.
And we also started this idea that to bring the Dark Ages back even further, from not just taking away cities. So we started saying that you could get out of a dark age if you earned enough era score.
Yeah, something I was very worried about for the design very early on was how to make dark ages fun. Because we realized that with strategy games and turn-based games, it's fun to just like try a new map, or you might load an old save or something like that. We didn't want players to hit a dark age and be like, oh, this is lame.
Right. Shouldn't be a rage quit.
Yeah, there should be something interesting about it. There should be something that keeps drawing you through. Like we always thought of it as like an underdog story. So it's like, yeah, you're kind of like down and out for this round, but you can come back later on. We kept trying to. Early on, we identified that, and we tried to go for that feeling. So here was like another step in that direction where it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're in Dark Age, but if you do well, you can actually like cancel it early. You don't have to wait for the next era. And the screenshot here is pretty cool. This is one of our first lineups of the governors, and they're our art team. It's the same team that did the concepts and the models for our leaders. So one of the first things they did was trying to look at silhouettes, like what are the sort of shapes of the different governors, so that they'll be easily identifiable and have their own personality. Not just when you're looking at them big on this UI screen, but also when they're tiny little icons in the cities. So you could be like, oh, yep, that's Amani the Diplomat. We didn't have Amani the Diplomat yet, but this was an early version of trying to find that stuff out.
So problem that happened when we started putting this in was people were still very confused by governors.
Yeah.
What are they? They still weren't sure how to play with them, what they were.
Are they like great people? Are they from history? Or are they like invented and immortal, kind of like leaders are? It's kind of caught in the middle.
It was this idea of like, wait, am I killing them, or do I use it once? Does it go away? What are they?
Yeah.
And then the randomness with it that we talked about, that was really frustrating, because you would get a set of governors that you're like, I don't care about any of these bonuses. And I think Civ players generally like to be able to plan and look ahead and see like, okay, well, here's what I want to do, or here's where I'm headed. And when you have something where it's like, I'm heading this direction, and you get a curveball that's like you couldn't do anything about, you couldn't see coming, forget it. That was very frustrating.
There's some like design weirdness too, because if we wanted a governor that like helped you with the space race or something like that, like if you randomly got him in the ancient era, that makes no sense. And it's just kind of taking up one of your spots. So we were like trying to come up with all these rules of like, okay, well, if we have random governors, but like certain ones can only randomly happen after this point in the game, it just kind of became messy if we wanted to like have this pacing to like what governors could do.
And then the Dark Ages changes definitely helped out. Like, it was better to not lose your cities, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't the underdog story that people wanted to fight through.
Yeah.
It was very much a like, okay, well, I gotta finish my my era score and get out of here, get out of this Dark Age, but I'm not really enjoying it.
Right.
So. We made some more changes.
Yeah, so we made some more course corrections, yeah. So we decided to embrace these fictional governor personalities. We decided we would have 7 of them. It'd be an opportunity for some awesome art, because this is another moment where Andrew kind of came to me and was like, hey, like, I think we can have some resources to like make these governors really cool personalities. Like our leader team has some time, and so we embraced that. We decided we're not going to do historical figures, because then they'd be too much like great people who are kind of like used and then expended. We wanted the governors to persist throughout the game and to have these promotion trees with different upgrade strategies.
Right. And I think one of the really cool things was also just saying like, if they're not great people with their with a specific name, or a historical person, or they're not a leader, they're not that. They still need to mean something. It's Civ, we're not just making this up. So we looked at defining them as historical archetypes. These are important roles and jobs that people would have in all the different civilizations. So, so what Anton mentioned earlier, it's not just Amani, it's Amani the Diplomat. That's how we think of them, as, not just Amani, but a whole identity to her.
Yeah, and she's got a sort of personality, and she has a set of bonuses that sort of allows her to be useful in different situations. We really liked the promotion trees as well, because we realized that if we give the player like 20-odd governor promotions in a game, but there's only 7, you can choose like, do you want to go kind of wide and get each governor so you can have like them stationed in a lot of different cities?
Right.
Or do you want to focus on just a handful of governors but make them really powerful by promoting them early on?
And this went towards the sort of the idea of not I guess like you said earlier, the challenge for the bigger empires.
Yes.
Right. So if you want powerful governors, you can't have as many of them.
Yes.
And then if you want to have a lot of them, then or if you have a lot of cities, you're not going to be able to put a governor everywhere.
Yeah.
So you're going to go up against cities that have more governors, that are more powerful.
Yeah.
So that was as much a strength for the smaller empires as it was a challenge for the larger ones.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a soft tugging of the reins once you had more than 7 cities, because you couldn't have a governor everywhere, and you had to kind of like station your governors all across your empire. You've been spread thin. So yeah, we liked that sort of design for it.
And then the idea of the heroic age came out as well. And this was the sort of, well, if you overcome a dark age early, you actually get something. And the way Anton designed it, I think he had to explain it about once every 2 or 3 days, the first way it went in.
It was complicated.
When you tell me if I get this right. When you overcame a dark age, you basically got a token, so that the next time you got a golden age, next time you got a golden age, then it was a heroic age.
Right.
Didn't have to be right away.
Yeah.
Didn't have to be the next age. It could be like 4 eras later. You could live in dark ages and you had this token sitting in your pocket.
Yeah.
And
it's like
automatically
a
got cashed in. And I remember people being like, wait, I got a heroic, I was in a dark age, and I got out of it, and then I was in a couple normal ages, and then I got a golden age, but it was like 5 eras later, and I was all of a sudden in a heroic age. Why did that happen?
Yeah.
And no one understood it other than Anton, and I think me, because I heard him explain it 5 times.
Right.
But
yeah, it was kind of confusing, and like it led to potential exploits as well. It's like, well, if I get a dark age early on, then I can save this coupon for a super golden age for like when I need it.
Everyone loves coupon clipping. So it was great though, because everyone who, once they understood that, they're like, okay, I like that idea. I just didn't get it when I was playing the game.
And it definitely like played into that. We didn't even know that Rise and Fall was the name of the expansion at this point, but like it played into that dynamic empires theme and like the idea where you're an underdog and you're coming back up and you're more powerful. We actually had called it a Renaissance for a while before we called it a heroic age, because we thought, just like the medieval dark ages here in Europe kind of led into the Renaissance later on, that was kind of a nice flavor. But we already have the Renaissance era and the tech tree, and Renaissance already meant something very specific in our games. So we're like, I don't think we want to confuse it with that. So we decided to call it something else.
So then it was time to start pulling these systems together, and we basically said that if we're going to have this theme, we need all these things to work together. And that's where we dropped the name cultural identity, because cultural identity confused everybody. And they were like, well, I have a really high culture, why am I still losing cities? And that's where the name loyalty came from. It was, okay, we're gonna put that in there, and it's going to be something that every city has, and loyalty made sense, right? Yeah. And we started filling out the historic moments catalog.
Yeah, so like when I first did the historic moments for the early prototypes, there were maybe like a dozen of them, which made it kind of boring, especially in that top 3 version where over and over again you were seeing the same things. But this was the point in the project where we just like made a whole bunch, and I leaned on some support from the rest of the team, and we were able to get really cool art for them as well, so started meeting a lot more. We ended up with more than 100 unique historic moments.
I think it's like 180 different unique art for all the historic moments in there.
And then depending on like if it was this religion you found under this one, like the art will change in subtle ways, and the text will kind of call out this is this city, this is this city, so we ended up with a lot of variety, which is nice.
Unfortunately, it still wasn't quite fun enough.
Yeah.
So the Dark Ages allowing heroic ages was good, but it wasn't there like we talked about.
Yeah.
And the loyalty was extremely volatile. The original version of the math, basically it was really, it was unbounded. You could end up with something where cities were having plus 50 loyalty per turn, or minus 60, and you could get a city and lose it in 2 turns.
Yeah.
You take it from your opponent and it would just drop right off the map.
Yeah.
And it definitely was not, a fun way to play the game. You didn't feel like people were actually committed to you when you founded a city. You couldn't go on conquest. It kind of ruined domination for a while in our
right.
test.
It kind of slowed down some stuff. Yeah, and you'd lose cities without understanding why or be able to react in time to it. Also, players wanted to be able to use it more offensively. Like we had these, population pressures in place to kind of like reflect the structure of the map, but people wanted to be able to, actively mess with somebody else's loyalty or actively improve their own loyalty if there was a city in trouble. And by this point we had already realized that having the governors, in addition to their promotions, giving them loyalty in whatever city that they're stationed in was a big move. So that was like your main tool, but we realized that players wanted more than that. They wanted other things to be able to improve their loyalty.
So the final course corrections. the dark policies was a thing that we came up. Basically, when we started talking about it, everyone said, yes, that's the thing that's going to start making it fun.
Yeah, I got a quick story about this too. So like we every 2 weeks or so.
I'm getting the time signal.
Oh, I see. Okay, so very quick then. So we had this designer meeting with Sid Meier and the other leads at the company at Frederiksen, and I was kind of like pitching them. Partway through the project, I was like, yeah, like we're gonna do Dark Ages, this sort of thing, but I'm worried about Dark Ages not being fun. And one of the other designers, actually, Dave McDonough, who worked with me on Beyond Earth, he's like, what if you have like dark civics or like dark policies or something where like, because you're in a Dark Age, you can do something that you can't do any other way. And I was like, that sounds really cool. So we pursued that really hard for this time.
And then the dedications and the dark policies tying to the era and having historic flavor was a big change.
Yeah.
The loyalty math is actually another one that's really good. I'm sorry, I'm going real fast here, so we don't.
Yeah. So another quick story. So the unboundedness of like plus 50, minus 50 that we were having in the prototype. Ed Beach actually had a really good idea. He'd worked on these American Civil War games, board games, where you have these like combat things where like instead of being like crazy over here, crazy over here, you compare the ratio. It's like, okay, well it's like a 3-to-1 or it's a 2-to-1, and based on that, you sort of like clamp it to this like, okay, it's going to be between this number and this number. It's never going to go past that. So we adopted a version of that so that we could kind of like take that crazy variability and clamp it down. And once we did that, the other sources of loyalty became much more interesting.
Right, and that's where the sort of the last bullet comes in, was the more sources for the active loyalty, and that's where we put bread and circuses in for the
spy operations.
Yeah. It was the things where you could start actively planning how you're going to get your loyalty up or down, or push other people's loyalty out, and sort of basically start playing the loyalty game rather than just being a victim of it or watching it happen.
Right.
And then we had to update a lot of civ abilities. This is also, we're good. We basically had to spend a lot of time going back. For those of you who played the base game, you know that a lot of the Rise and Fall systems basically broke old leaders. They broke old policies and units. And we had to spend a lot of time going through and making the updates to that stuff, updating the city-states, the policies. And
Amsterdam and Seoul were city-states, so we were like, oh, we're going to have them as civs now, so let's find some
Genghis Khan was a great person.
Genghis Khan was a great general.
And then the government district sort of torpedoed the whole legacy bonuses for governments, so we had to go back in and rework and add all of that back in a new and different way.
This is another one of my whiteboard pictures here. This is us, kind of the whole design office, taking a look at all the different systems in the game and like different bonuses, and trying to see like, okay, well, like, do players have enough ways to influence this? Do they have too many ways? Do the bonuses like overlap where you could get like plus 10% from here and plus 50% from here and just becomes super crazy? So we sort of did a sanity check where it's like, okay, well, like, here are the base game systems, here are the new systems, and here are all the bonuses overlapping. And like, are there any holes? Are there any things where there's too many? So we sort of did that sort of evaluation as well.
And I guess that's it. So, obviously with that, it was a lot of polish and bug fixing, and we finally got the expansion out the door to something that we think plays really well, and it meets that dynamic empire goal. And we hope everybody's enjoying it, and want to thank you guys for coming out to listen to us speak. So thank you all.